This conference will now be recorded.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the November meeting of the Audit Committee and the full board here at the Sacandaga Field Office in Mayfield. For members of the public attending remotely, we ask that you please close other programs on your computer or phone, silence your cell phone, and mute your radio when not speaking. Audio, excuse me. Agendas for today's meeting are available at hrbrrd.ny.gov under board meetings. The conference organizer will monitor the program's chat function for anyone wishing to address the board during the public comment period during the meeting of the full board. For anyone wishing to address the board, kindly use the chat function or email drao@hrbrrd.ny.gov or simply speak up during the public comment period during the full board meeting. I will now hand over the gavel to our Audit Committee Chair, Mr. Hayes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This time we will gavel in here, and we have a call to order. They have the first order, we have Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. What if I could have the roll call?
I'll be standing in for roll call today.
Mr. Leslie.
Audit Committee Chair Albert Hayes.
Here.
Committee Member Timothy Reagan. Here. Committee Member Richard Byrd. Here. Board Chair Mark Finkel.
Here.
Mr. DeWitt.
Here.
Ms. Allen.
Here.
Mr. Candido.
Here.
Executive Director John Callahan is me, and I am here. Chief Engineer Robert Fultan.
Here.
Chief Fiscal Officer Timothy Manicha.
Here.
And Mr. Leslie and Ms. Rizicki are excused today.
Thank you. What if I could have a motion to adopt or revise the meeting agenda?
I make that motion.
I'll second.
I have a second.
I will.
All in favor? Any opposed? Hearing none. Can I have the approval of the September 10th Audit Committee meeting minutes?
I will. I'll second
And a
it.
second. All approved?
Aye.
Thank you. Under committee business, we have under new business, we have a presentation of independent audit by John C. Castello, CPA of EFPR Group LLP, Certified Public Accountants for year ending June 30, 2024. Mr. Manicha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It gives me great pleasure to introduce John Costello, a certified public accountant since 2008 and a partner at EFPR Group, where he has responsibility for providing audit, accounting, and consulting services for numerous educational and governmental organizations, including the regulating district. John has over 10 years of public accounting experience. He received a Bachelor of Science degree in registered accounting from the State University of New York College at Buffalo in 2006. John is going to review his firm's report to the board, share at a high level his reflections on the audited financial statements, and answer any questions that you have. Before getting started, I just want to thank my colleagues, Anna Tracy and Kim Scott, as well as John and his colleagues for their hard work and commitment to getting the audit completed in a timely manner. And with that, John, I'll turn the floor over to you.
Okay, you should have been provided with 3 documents, report to the board, the consolidated financial statements, as well as the investment report. I'm going to start with the report to the board. I'm not going to read this word for word. So we audited the financial statements of the Hudson River Black River Regulating District for the year ended June 30th, 2024. Professional standards require we provide you information under auditing standards generally accepted in the United States of America, auditing standards. The first section, significant accounting policies. No new accounting policies were adopted, and the application of existing policies was not changed during the year ended June 30th, 2024. The next part just goes on to talk about that we evaluated accounting estimates. On page 2, financial statement disclosures are neutral, consistent, and clear. There was no difficulties in dealing with management and performing and completing our audit. Any misstatements were trivial and management has corrected such misstatements. There was no disagreements with management. We have obtained the representation letter from management. We're not aware of management consulting with other independent accountants or otherwise known as opinion shopping. On page 3, there are no other findings or issues that have not already been disclosed that we feel needs to be brought to the board's attention. In the next, last section, we discussed that we only applied limited procedures to the required supplementary information and we do not express an opinion on those. So that's pretty much it for the board. Financial statements themselves. On page 1, this is our independent auditor's report. We audited financial statements, the consolidated financial statements of Hudson River, Black River, regulated. Oh, sorry.
The thicker of the two.
Yeah. So we audited the consolidated financial statements of Hudson River, Black River Regulating District for the year ended June 30th, 2024. And in our opinion, our consolidated financial statements referred to present fairly in all material respects the financial position of the regulating district and the respective changes in financial position and cash flows for the year ended in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. That is a clean or unmodified opinion, which is what you want. Next section is our basis for our opinion. We conducted our audit in accordance with auditing standards generally accepted in the United States of America, as well as government auditing standards. We were required to be independent of the district. Skip on to page 2. Section responsibilities of management for consolidated financial statements. Management is responsible for the preparation of their presentation of the financial statements in accordance with accounting principles generally accepted in the United States of America. Next section is the auditor's responsibilities. Our objectives are to obtain reasonable assurance about whether the financial statements are free from material misstatement, whether due to fraud or error, to issue our auditor's report. Reasonable assurance is a high level assurance, but is not absolute assurance, and therefore is not a guarantee that an audit conducted in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards and government auditing standards will always detect the material misstatement when it exists. Just goes on to describe how we performed our audit. I'm not going to read through all of that. On page 3, under the section entitled Required Supplementary Information, governmental accounting principles generally accepted in the United States requires management's discussion and analysis and the other required supplementary information at the back of the audit report you presented to supplement the basic financial statements. We applied limited procedures to the required supplementary information, and we do not express an opinion or provide any assurance on the information because the limited procedures do not provide us with sufficient evidence to express an opinion or provide any assurance. The next section is supplementary information. Again, these are for the schedules at the back that show the consolidation of Hudson River and Black River into the consolidated financial statements. Our audit was conducted for the purpose of forming an opinion on the consolidated financial statements. The other supplementary information is presented for additional analysis. It is not required by the basic consolidated financial statements. But we do give an opinion, and in our opinion, the other supplementary information is fairly stated in all material respects in relation to the basic consolidated financial statements as a whole. And the next section just goes on to note that we do issue a report on internal control and compliance, which is at the end of the financial statements, which we'll get to. Pages 4 through 4 through 10 is management's discussion and analysis, where management gets to discuss operations of the district and any activities that feel to be relevant to the public's knowledge. So I won't read through that, but we'll just skip right over to page 11, which is your statements of opposition. Major changes, your accounts was, sorry, page 11. Major changes, your accounts receivable increased significantly. That was the receivable from New York State for the purchase of the Stillwater hydro plant. Your capital assets net increased about $4 million. Again, that was purchase of the Stillwater plant as well as construction in progress for various projects around the district. Your liabilities remain fairly consistent. For your non-current liabilities, your net pension liability decreased about $4 million. New York State reports that directly to the district in their reports. For your proportionate share of the net pension liabilities, it's actuarially determined. Other post-employment benefits increased about $1 million. Again, that's actuarially determined based on your plan and the number of employees.
Is in any audits that you've been going through, because I think when we hired this group, I think Tim said in this, you do a number of government agencies and stuff going through. So I just want to make sure I had that right. Is anybody starting to take a real good look at post-employment benefit obligations and the long-term liabilities associated with there and starting to put up a red flag on that?
The only way to adjust, it's a non-cash number, you pay your health benefit.
Yeah, no, I understand.
Okay.
I understand what it is, but
Okay,
it's still a long-term liability.
yes.
And so, but again, with the amount that's starting to show there, is that creating any concern within the financial world for that?
No, they all know it's a non-cash thing.
Yeah.
Issue. It's based on your benefits that you
Yep.
give and the number of employees,
Yep.
and that's the only way to change that number.
I understand,
Okay.
but from a financial standpoint and the ability to pay, you're saying nobody's getting concerned about how high that number is getting.
No, because you pay on a yearly basis or a monthly basis with your insurance premiums, you're never actually gonna have to pay.
My question is why did all the big major industries, when they saw that number 20 years ago, going up to where it did, start making drastic changes to be able to stay competitive, and government hasn't reacted yet? Okay, I'll shut up now.
No, I'm just telling you, it's a function of the benefits you provide and the
Yeah.
number of employees.
Yep.
And then it goes to the actuary and they, when you look back at, that's on page 34, you can see the 1% change in like the rates they use. You can see like a 1% change in the discount rate changes the number up or down $2 million.
Mhm.
Same with the trend rate for healthcare costs. I mean, so theoretically, you could have a $4 million swing if you go one way with one and one way with the other. But I don't see any governments concerned about it. They're more concerned about the public seeing it, just because you've got a $14 million liability that's causing this unrestricted net position of $8 million. But it's a non-cash item. Same with the net pension liability. You pay your yearly bill to New York State, but now they're saying, well, overall, when we look at down the road, this is your piece of what's not funded. Luckily, they're funded, what are they this year, about 98%. I know there's a lot of other states where they're down to like 25%. So, I mean, you pay that yearly bill, it's not nice to pay, but at least your people are covered. You're not gonna get hit with that.
So the only other thing that I would add is that there is variation in this number on a yearly basis. It went up this year in large part because as interest rates came down, the discount rate we used to take that stream of actuarially determined payments over 30 years gets to be a little bit higher. This number has been, just in my 5 years here, been as high as $18 million. It's been as low as maybe a little bit less than the 13 million for the prior year. So there is that kind of volatility depending on how you discount that stream. But at the end of the day, as you indicated, there is no question that this is a long-term obligation. We do pay out every month for healthcare costs, which are the biggest component of OPEB for both active employees, which have not changed, in fact, are actually down by 1 or 2 over the last few years, but for retirees as well. And all those benefits are subject to the negotiation process that we enter into with our representative employees every 4 years.
Okay. So those were the big changes on your statement of net position. Page 12 is your statement of activities. You'll notice the biggest changes is a decrease in water power service and lease revenue. This was from not having a contract with Erie Boulevard, as well as purchasing the still water plant because of non-contract. So that's the biggest changes.
Erie Boulevard, otherwise known as Brookfield.
Oh.
Shorthand.
No, no problem. For your operating expenses, you'll see personal services, employee benefits increased about $1 million. Again, that's from the non-cash change in OPEB. So we have to, whatever the change is for OPEB, we have to book that difference into that number. So it's not like we had $1 million more of cash expenditures. It's just a change in the OPEB as well as pensions. Contractual services increased about $400,000. That was primarily from increased engineering services. Those are all consistent. Then you'll see the non-operating revenue. You'll see that New York State appropriation for the purchase of still water. So overall, your net position increased 1.5 million to a net deficit of $620,000. But again, a lot of that is driven by the fact that you have to report OPEB. That would be approximately $14 million in the black, and been required to report that. 13 and 14 are the statement of cash flows. It just shows where your money is coming from. 15 through 15 through 39 are most of the financial statements where describes a little bit more in detail some of the items that we discussed, the OPEB and how the changes in that. Also in there is pensions on page 30, which is reported by New York State. As you can see, 1% change in their discount rate. You go from 600, a liability of 681,000 to up to, so if they decrease it 1%, it's a $2.1 million liability. Again, that's non-cash, you pay every year into the system. And this is subject to New York State actuarially determining it. So there's not much you can do about that, those numbers. Again, non-cash number.
That non-cash thing just drives me crazy.
It's GASB required it to be
I know,
reported.
I understand the whole thing pretty
Oh,
good,
oh.
and so I got it, but
It's just like the whole new lease thing they're doing and restrictions. Just adding more stuff to your financial statements. So I'm not gonna read through these, but it gives more detail on operations and what you have. Page 40, this is report, page 40 through 43, or, sorry, 42, are required supplementary information. This one just shows your proportionate share of the net pension liability or assets. And how it changed over the years. Page 41 is pension contributions by year and how it relates to your payroll. Page 42 is your OPEB liability and how it changed over the years and discount rate years. So you can see it's hovered between low 13s to a high of almost $17 million. Again, that's subject to the discount rate and the healthcare cost trend rates. And then page 43 and 44 are the consolidation of the Hudson River and the Black River districts, which is what was presented up on page 11. So you can see that the numbers for each district and totaling together. Page 45 is our report on internal control and compliance. Well, we don't give an opinion. We did not detect any deficiencies or material weaknesses that are required to be reported, but they may exist. Next, on page 46 is a report on compliance. We did not note any non-compliance with laws, regulations, or grant agreements. Again, we expressed no opinion on that. And non-compliance may exist that was not detected. So that's pretty much the financial statements. Anybody have any specific questions on those? Okay. The next is our investment compliance report.
Smaller,
Yeah, it's smaller down one. I know, Ron.
It's getting,
yes.
So we're required to report on investments in compliance with New York State rules and regulations. I'm not going to read through it again. In our opinion, the district complied in all material respects with the required New York State laws and regulations. And those are 3 documents.
Anybody have any other questions for John?
Very good, very thorough, thank you.
Well, if we have any, no questions or anything, thank you, Mr. Castello.
You're welcome.
And let's see, that would be complete in the any business. What if we could have adjournment?
I will. I'll second it.
We have a first, Dick, a second, Tim, all in favor?
Aye.
Out of 10:24.
Good job.
I gotta do that. I'd like to call to order the November meeting of the Hudson River Black River Regulating District. Roll call.
Board Chair Mark Finkel.
Here.
First Vice Chair Kenneth DeWitt.
Here.
Second Vice Chair Alfred Candido.
Here.
Board Member Hayes.
Here.
Board Member Allen.
Here.
Board Member Byrd. Here. Board Member Reagan. Here. Executive Director John Callahan is me and is here. Chief Engineer Robert Fultan.
Present.
Chief Fiscal Officer Timothy Manicha.
Here.
And Mr. Leslie and Ms. Rozicki are excused, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I need a motion to adopt the meeting agenda.
I would make that,
Go ahead.
I would make that motion.
You have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We have a lengthy, then, I'm glad to see it, a public comment. And I get the list. I did. First one is Jerry Triandile. Excuse me.
And if I could ask you just to stand by this window right here, Jerry, and that way the camera will pick you up as well.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
Great, so Jerry Trant, 1192 Cathan Road in the town of Dade. I'm here to represent the town of Dade Property Owners Association. Here to give an update to the dock situation that was brought up at the last board meeting. And basically, DEC was issuing tickets to the dock installers, removers, basically questioning the use of their docks by the installers and the removal folks. David Smale, who now has made it uneventfully with his wife down to Florida, he sends his regards. He has been negotiating with DEC, so Robert Fiorentino from Region 5 DEC Fisheries. Basically, DEC has now graciously agreed to allow the removal and launching of personal docks from their boat launches with certain restrictions, such as one, any and all dock installers must get a permit from DEC, which will stipulate such requirements as the day and hours of the work that will be allowed to be conducted. For instance, during the week versus the weekend to avoid conflicts with folks that are wanting to launch their boats. Another requirement will be that the dock installers carry the proper insurance provisions. So that looks like that's moving forward. And again, this is an interim update. We'll add more meat to the bone as we proceed. Likewise, I have personally spoken to one of the dock installers, Rich Dormeyer, and he has agreed to be one of the first permitted dock installers, as well as the point of contact for any and all potential dock installers, to at least explain the overall DEC process. And then likewise, we will continue to get the word out about the process as more details come out. And GSLA has also agreed to put this above information on their website. We want to make sure that all the homeowners understand what the process is, as well as if there's any and all dock installers, that they have the proper permitting and everything else, so that they're not losing out in any potential business, as well as getting unnecessarily ticketed because they didn't know. So we'll continue to work on that information over the next few months. But bottom line is looks like there's been a basic agreement, and we'll just continue to add more information as time proceeds here.
That's great news.
So with that, one other thing, I guess it would be great if we could get an update today on what's going on with the Conklinville Dam. Just basically, what is the time frame of when that work is going to get started and whatnot. So you can do that during the proper sections here. So thank you. That's all I have to report today.
Thank you very much.
Good news.
Next, we have an entire college, I guess. No, I'm sorry, Paul Smith.
Yeah, I frequently get asked, are you associated with the college? I'm like, no, I'm not. But my name is Paul Smith. I live along South Shore Road in the summer. I used to own it and have been there a long time. On July 16th, we had a tornado that came through that area. And so I'm here to talk a little bit about the work that's happened to clean that up, and then also to ask the regulating board's help to finish that work. So July 16th, I was fortunately traveling, but some of my neighbors weren't. We had a tornado. The damage up of that particular area was very extensive. It was what I would say overwhelming. When I arrived, I couldn't believe it. You couldn't even get to the lake. It was unbelievable. We spent the last, probably till now, cleaning that up with the help of companies that we hired, tree companies, ourselves, and also the regulating board pitched in at that time to help clean that up. And that's proceeded, and that's been great. Currently, though, we have some brush piles that were left by the regulating board. And when I make those comments, please, I have the greatest respect for the work they did. They were great. They pitched in, they helped. So nothing I'm saying has anything derogatory about the work that they did. But as a result of where we were at the time and when that stopped, there were these brush piles that were left in certain areas, mainly in a shared permit area, which is next to my permit area. Unfortunately, because of the dry weather and high winds, on October 31st, one of those brush piles started on fire. And it could have been catastrophic, quite frankly. But fortunately, somebody that lives up there full time was just coming back from the store and saw it and called it in. And so they came over. I think we had at least six departments from around the area respond, and they managed to put it out. They had to come back the next day because we got an underground fire. But at least to date, that hasn't started up again. So what I'm here to ask, and I can show you some pictures of what those brush piles, if you want to pass those around, look like in that area is, I would request that the board consider helping us remove those brush piles. Like I said, I'm not being derogatory. They were created, when the Red Lane District, tried to help us. I think they didn't have the equipment to get rid of those at the time. Our assumption at that time was that they were going to come back and remove them, but that was a bad assumption, I guess, on our part. And so I'm here now to ask that happen, if at all possible. What I would say is, and I'm not going to suggest how you do it, but those of us that hired private companies, it seemed like that was a very efficient way to proceed because they had the equipment to come in and they cleared. I have a 100-foot lot. And like I said, there were probably 50 trees down in brush. And within 2 days, 2 crews, they cleared that whole area for me. And I don't want to, once again, not to say badly, but we've invested probably over $100,000 in cleaning up the area and restoring it to regulating board property down there. And it's not, we're not talking about a large community either. It's, it's a very limited group of people down there, so.
These ours to keep, Paul?
No,
we can.
Ms. Gerard, can they keep those? Okay, yep. Yep, she's gonna speak next, so thank you.
Thank you.
I think our big concern is that these piles are huge. Some of them are 10 feet tall. We have 9 piles like that around. One of them burnt up. So now we have all these black limbs and all that kind of stuff. The thing I think we're worried about is what's going to happen. I mean, with these piles, we're not going to get any growth under there. We're not going to have any grass growing or trees growing or anything because we have these huge piles and we don't know what to do with them. We need some help. Thank you.
Thank you. Next we have Russell Fowler. Am I right? Or did, the next one I had on my list was John and Diane Byrne. Is that who just spoke?
No.
No, okay, I'm sorry. That would be next, I'm sorry.
We support everything that Paul has.
Yes. Hi, I live at 1593 South Shore Road. My neighbors, the Crispins, have 1596. And they own a long stretch of beach, which unfortunately was part of the tornado. And there's a lot of dead wood down there. We still hear stuff coming down once in a while, trees suddenly falling. And there's a lot of regulated property there. And I think it would be beneficial if it was cleaned up. At least the stuff cut up and gotten out of there because, again, it's another fire hazard. So you get a good north wind, that stuff sets off. And then it comes right down through the neighborhood and takes out everybody's house. And it would be much better for all of us if that were cleaned up. And thank you very much for all you did do, which was great. We really appreciated it. Thank you.
Thank you. John and Diane Byrne, I'm sorry, I went out of order.
We would support everything the other speakers have spoken about and would encourage the district to.
They support what the other speakers. Oh, okay,
I just said ditto.
Thank you, okay. Okay, next I have Debbie Gerard.
Oh, I just, that was me.
Oh,
Okay,
I didn't know my name was on
Robert Richard Ricard, I'm sorry.
Day. Just to read on what everybody else is saying is very simply, we didn't ask for that storm to come through. But we did ask for help to get cleaned up. And unfortunately, the lake is beautiful and there are a bunch of us that have smaller areas, unlike Paul and some of our other neighbors that are cleaned up beautifully. My situation with that is a lot of that material that was on all of the areas is on our little tiny 10-foot strips. We have a difficult time getting to the lake. It creates a big fire hazard. John Burns and I put out a fire that was underground after our wonderful fire department came over and helped us. Luckily, we caught it in time, but it did start under the ground. And as far as I know, fires can last quite a long time underground. So if these piles consistent to next year and we get another heat stroke like we've had this year, who knows what's going to happen? And God forbid that any of these properties get burned down. So all we're asking for is some help. All of us here, we're all willing to help. You know, we'll move sticks, move stuff, whatever we got to do, but we don't have the equipment and trucks to take care of that material. So that's all I want to convey to you people. And thank you very much for listening to us. And again, the people that were working there, Matt and his crew, fantastic, just fantastic.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And the last one I have on the list is Jane Denning.
Thank you. I'm president of the Great Sacandaga Lake Association, and I'm just wanted to speak about one issue that's kind of come to our attention recently through our membership, and that is the huge uptick of ATVs on the shoreline and on the lake bed on the lake. And we have a board member, Mark Deal, who has communicated with, I think his name is John Kiskis. Is he here?
Dan
Dan, yes. Yes, he responded to Mark and clarified for us that indeed ATVs are prohibited on the shores and on the lake bed for many reasons, including the environmental impact and the introduction of invasive species and on and on. So my question and request is, could the regulatory district do a post on their social media on Facebook, just a little reminder of what these rules and regulations are? Because we would then be able to share that to the larger community, to the like the Great Sacandaga Lake Life has 50,000 followers, so we would be able to kind of get the message out without having to really be the ones to do it. So that is my question. And we are also permit holders, my husband and I, and we have seen caravans of ATVs coming around the south end of the lake. And, you know, we have this incredible, you know, population of wildlife, geese, herons, loons. And last weekend, they've been everywhere. And last weekend, they completely disappeared due to this activity. So that's my request on that front. And then the only other thing at the request of my board members was to find out if there was any update on the dock permits for the Woods Hollow RV Park. Thank you.
Okay. The ATVs, there is a regulation?
So there are two, and we've worked, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, a lot with DC over the last few years on regulating that sort of activity. There are a few different things in play here. One is the rules and regs as they pertain to permit areas and the restriction on use of motorized vehicles for access to the reservoir as opposed to operating on lands on our jurisdiction, under our jurisdiction around the reservoir. And the other are some, and I won't try and cite them, specific rules and regulations relative to ATV use on state land within the Adirondack Park. And that's where our colleagues, the environmental conservation officers from DC, have helped with certain situations that we've had in the past. Certainly, I think the chief engineer was talking about it today, sort of for the date under the offer of settlement, probably a record low elevation for this time of year, where the weather's still pretty good. The lake is not frozen, and that has probably contributed in no small part to the uptick in this sort of activity that we're seeing. So I think, when Mr. Leslie gets back, we'll work with him a little bit on the language, but certainly getting the word out on social media about a myriad of things is something we've, I think, done more and more effectively over the last few years. Certainly a reasonable message to put out on this issue as well. And I'll just note also, Mr. Chairman, because Jane did ask the question, we have not received a permit application on the proposed campground or the docks in Mayfield.
Okay, can the other issue that people brought up today?
So I think, Mr. Chairman, I would also say, certainly unprecedented for the people who were impacted by this terrible event on July 16th. Certainly unprecedented in terms of the necessity of our stopping everything else that we were doing and responding sort of in a triage mode to the site. We did transport, I don't know how many linear feet of downed trees and logs off-site that are currently stockpiled at Conklinville Dam. We tried to sell those competitively at auction. We were unsuccessful. We are now getting prices for somebody to come and remove those. So, and this isn't about cost, right? Because if it was about cost, the board wouldn't have wanted us or told us to help in the manner that we did. We borrowed, we sourced equipment through New York State, through the Office of Emergency Management. We rented equipment. We borrowed equipment from the town of Edinburgh, from the village of Northville. We did look for a large capacity chipper, 15 inches or greater. We did borrow a smaller chipper from New York State Canal Corporation. It was not capable of addressing sort of the piles that you heard about today. Had we had that equipment on site at the time, we would have certainly progressed with this work in addition to the removal of the trees. As you heard today, we did not do that. We were unable to get that equipment. And when we came out of that sort of triage mode, we did go back to the other core mission activities that we needed to tend to. I did talk to Mr. Smith on the phone recently. I know he spoke to Mr. Ginter. We certainly talked to the forest rangers that responded to the fire on October 31st. We certainly appreciate those concerns, and we know it's an issue. I mean, and again, if it were not an unprecedented event, we wouldn't have responded in the way we did anyway, because typically lands that are permitted to commercial or residential permittees, we're kind of out of it. But this was not a situation where we could throw our hands up and say, not our problem. We wanted to be good neighbors. And I think part of what you heard today is we were good neighbors, and maybe some people looking for us to continue to be good neighbors in that respect. So we don't have the personnel or the equipment to respond to this in-house. This is something that, if the board wanted us to take a look at, we'd be coming back to the board, I think, for an authorization to hire somebody to do the work. And I certainly think, this would be a number that would necessitate board approval. So certainly we will listen to what the board wants us to take a look at, and
Yeah, I don't
we
know.
recognize
Everybody
it's a
else
big
thinks
issue.
We should take a look at it anyway.
You know, so I have a property on the lake, so I'm a permit holder also. And every spring, I have a number of trees that come into the cove where I live. And it's my responsibility to get them up, get them taken care of and all that type of thing. I would love for the group to do this for me, so I wouldn't have to do it because I'm getting older. But here's my question. Can we figure out a way, you guys, so it's not something that's precedent setting, that other people are going to ask for similar things of coming down through? Because I think that's our problem. We get into, once you do it once, and then it's thrown back at you as a board on a continual basis. You did it for them. Why aren't you doing it for me? So with the piles, the only question I'm asking, and I know right now we got a burn ban in effect, but is this something where the local fire departments, as part of their training, could burn them down for you with hoses and stuff right there? Is that something we could talk them into doing? Because it is a unique situation. It's a one-shot deal, and it takes care of your problem, and it doesn't add a bigger problem for us down the road by doing something like that. I'm just curious.
Yeah, so in answer to those there were a couple of things in there. So I agree with you. Every spring I have the same problem you do and have to clean up logs that come in from the ring of fire or something like that. I think the thing that makes it special is the fact that it was a tornado. It was unprecedented.
Yeah.
The magnitude, I mean, if you were down there, it's unbelievable the amount of destruction and the number. I probably lost 50 trees at least on regulating board property. It was, I've lived there 40 years. I just couldn't believe it, is the way to put it. I now have a field. I'm planting trees because I want shade. So, you know, from that perspective, I think the way around not setting a precedent is say, hey, look, this is something that happened that, you know, was beyond what should be expected of permit holders to take on. Although, like I said, we hired tree companies to come in and do a lot of it. A lot of that was because we had boats banging on rocks. We couldn't get them out. You know, it was going to cost us more money not to do that almost.
Yeah, I'm not trying to argue with it because I understand.
So I'm just answering. I'm trying to answer.
But I want to just come back to you.
Yep.
I was 2 or 3 years ago on Halloween. We had that huge rainstorm come down. I ended up with 3 good-sized trees.
Yep.
So that's a special event. I would say that was a huge amount of rain at one. See that? I'm not arguing with any of you. I agree it's a problem. It's just, how do you determine what's a special event?
Well, when you
I
had
think the
hundreds,
state of emergency is
Yeah.
is what
Is that what you're thinking?
what gave us in consultation with the chair, because we didn't have the, sorry for jumping in here, opportunity to come back and talk about it in a formal board meeting. But given the state of emergency that was in place, generally the government can do things sort of in those situations that it doesn't ordinarily, isn't ordinarily able to do quickly and easily. And so that was the case here. We used that state of emergency as a way to source equipment, as a way to justify mobilizing our personnel and expending overtime and all those things. But I guess to your point, we would not undertake this sort of response absent a state of emergency, and that might be the distinction.
Wasn't that same thing on that Halloween thing with the roads and stuff flooded out? Wasn't that? I don't remember,
Yep,
John. I
20
really don't. Yeah.
2019, and I
Yeah.
think we were fortunately primarily in the business of providing downstream flood protection during that event.
Yeah.
We did that very successfully to communities downstream, and did not have, although certainly that spring we had an inordinate amount of debris and trees and docks that we collected with the workboat. But it did not. I think everybody has talked about how unbelievable, literally unbelievable this site was. And I've said that, we were, the Coast Guard Cutter Vigorous was the first unit into St. Thomas after Hurricane Marilyn. I've never seen anything like that in my life until this year, when we went from site to site. literally there was no way, you didn't know where the lake was, let alone
Couldn't get to it.
get to the lake. So it was really unbelievable and unprecedented. And I think, you know, as evidenced by the state of emergency that was enacted and our willingness to step in and support that effort. But normally, you're absolutely right. We are not staffed up to provide this level of service under normal circumstances. In fact, the management of this real property, the permit system itself, is a mission ancillary to our core mission of providing flood protection and flow augmentation. So we have sort of already checked the box of assisting here in an area that we otherwise normally wouldn't. I just want the board to understand, and we can get some estimates, but it won't be an insignificant number, and it's not something I think we can undertake in-house.
So the answer to the second part is, I don't think it's very easy to set a fire down there. There's too much debris. There's a few trees left that happen to be right in that same area, the way the prevailing wind blows and stuff. So I don't think that would be a practical way of doing it. That's my opinion. That would potentially get out of control, especially given the conditions that we've had, and going underground and stuff like that. So, I mean, we thought about that, quite frankly, but I don't think it's a wise move at this point to do that. And in terms of cost, you know, my own experience, you know, is going to be, I don't know, probably, who knows who's going to bid on it, but 10 to 20,000 maybe. That would be my guess, just off the top of my head. Maybe a little more, but I would hope not, because we're not talking about moving trees, right? I had to pay somebody to come in and remove trees as well as grind up this stuff. So, you know, it could be less than that.
Well, it's something we'll look into.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Anybody else need to speak? Okay.
And we'll just ask Megan if anybody has signed up to speak online.
I've asked all the people in attendance and there has been no request to speak.
Okay, next I need approval of our October 8th regular board meeting minutes. So moved. You have a second? Second. Any discussion or corrections? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
I think that was a report of the executive director, Mr. Callahan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My report appears on pages 63 to 64 in observance of the robust agenda. I will simply note we look forward to debuting in the coming days a live webcam from our Sacandaga field office looking out over Great Sacandaga Lake. I want to thank Director of Administrative Services, Stephanie Zicki, Matt Ginter, and the staff here that supported that installation. It has been put online. It is live, but not yet viewable through the public website, but will be shortly. With that, I'll just pause for any questions any members of the board may have.
Questions or comments? Very good. Contract actions. First, a resolution to approve the 11th Amendment to Contract C012012 with Klein-Smith Associates.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Resolution and memorandum, I believe, starts on page 65 of the packet. Klein-Schmidt has requested an amendment to contract C012012. That's the engineering services agreement related to the Hawkinsville Dam remediation project and to recognize additional engineering work effort needed to respond to contractor construction delays and contractor performance, follow up on non-conforming embankment grading, and to review and respond to several revisions that were unacceptable. Contractor supplied as-built survey and survey drawings. Klein-Smith Their additional scope of work includes a site visit to observe final site conditions and verify all punch list items are closed out, provide a project closeout and final site report, and submission of as-built and record drawings for the New York State DEC dam safety section, which will close out our permit with them and provide necessary project management and coordination. Their proposal is attached to my memorandum. Kleinschmidt proposes completing services outlined in the Amendment 11 Project Closeout Construction Engineering Support Scope of Services letter dated September 10th, 2024, for a fee not to exceed $13,500. Staff recommends acceptance of Kleinschmidt's Amendment 11 Project Closeout Construction Engineering Support Proposal and seeks board authorization to amend contract C012012 to include the scope of work and fee proposed, and seeks authorization for the executive director to execute an amendment to increase the contract price by $13,500 to a total contract price not to exceed $571,264. Happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Now, you feel it's justified? I know we had a lot of problems with them.
It is. Now, well, there's quite a bit of delay and extra work effort needed to address contractor activities out there. What isn't reflected here is some of the savings that we did have throughout the project using our own personnel, limiting and kind of steering Kleinschmidt over the course of the project. So if you recall how extensive some of the delay and extra work that was involved in the Hawkinsville remediation and additional effort that was needed there by the contractor, I think you realize then that the additional $13,500 is fairly reasonable, given the amount of extra effort that was involved.
The original Tyler Kreider is on the call as well, Rob.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
Tyler Kreider from Kleinschmidt is on the call and available for questions also.
Just the original amount that we approved was how much?
Well, this is Amendment 11. There have been several amendments.
The original amount.
The very first contract price.
Yep.
Which would have been design only.
When we accepted the grant or accepted the bid for the work, that original amount was how much?
Construction or engineering?
The construction.
Construction. Yeah.
Originally $1.7 million was the original construction cost.
And where are we at now with everything? Engineering and everything in it?
We were just slightly over that when we settled with ESG.
Well, we were on the construction only. We were under the board authorized amount because we did not have to come back to the board. But the ESG was seeking about an additional $350,000, and we settled for $80,000 or so, sort of in a take it or leave it scenario, and that kept us within the board amended and authorized amount for construction. I think you're asking for construction plus engineering services, and I don't know if Rob has that.
I don't have the various.
When you get it, can you just send it to me? If you don't have it right now, just send it to me. I'm just interested on what percentage are we over the original amount that was budgeted for it.
Right.
Everything, engineering, everything.
And I think the other, unless you were about to interject, Mr. Chairman, the other thing I would just note, Mr. Folkman and I, obviously you're going to get a presentation in a few minutes on the progress at Indian Lake Dam. As we continue to move up and undertake these more and more complicated and more costly projects, we want to apply all the lessons learned. For instance, on Hawkinsville, we said we're going to handle all construction inspection in-house. It's going to save us money. Maybe that saved us a lot of money in one area, but cost us a little money in another area. Here on Indian Lake, we said we're gonna contract out to Bergman for all construction inspection. Yesterday, Mr. Fulton and I were on a call where we directed the Bergman to take one of their construction inspection engineers off the job in order to save some funds, and we're going to supplement with our staff. So the pendulum sort of has swung back and forth. We're trying to apply all those lessons learned and figure out, especially as we go forward with Old Forge and Six Lake, and then working with OGS on Conklinville to make sure that we don't lose the opportunity to apply all the lessons learned on these.
Okay, I do need a motion to approve this 11th Amendment contract 012012. Have a motion?
I'll make the motion.
We have a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion or questions? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Motion carries. Next, report on the Indian Lake Rehabilitation Project progress. All right, Greg Johnson.
Yep, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Greg Johnson, Distant Leader. The engineer in charge of our project at Indian Lake is here to give you guys an update on the work and where we are from an engineering construction perspective. So pictures worth 1,000 words. We put some pictures together. So just the introduction here, go on. What I'm going to go over is basically what we've done in construction, what we've been able to do, some of the challenges that we've run into, and then kind of the work to be done, yet to be done. So kind of give this to show you, as Mr. Callahan pointed out, that the projects are getting larger in scale and more complex. This kind of just shows you the scale of this project. There is a lot of work going on here. Next one. Again, it's not an easy project. It's complicated and a lot of work going on. So what I did with this, next slide, is I took the presentation that I gave that summarized the work to be done, and I interwove some of the slides of the work that has been done and is being done now. So just in the same exact order, at the dam, we're doing some work on the embankment to raise it, flatten it, and when you do that, there's also a retaining wall that we had to strengthen to accommodate that. So the next slide. Raising the embankment meant there's a core wall, which is this piece right in there. That was built with the original dam, 1890-ish. We're raising the embankment. We wanted to raise that to the top so when the water could get that high, we didn't have a weak spot there. So that's the core wall that we've extended. Next slide. This kind of goes over the plan, the design drawings for that strengthening of the retaining wall that retains the embankment behind. Next slide. Kind of shows you what they're doing. This is from last week. The yellow circles, you can see that's where the anchors are going to go to tie that wall back. And here they have the rig set up just to drill through the facing stones. So they're just starting that work now. Next slide. Next big one is the stability improvements of the masonry dam. It's to keep it from, when the water gets too high, essentially tipping over. So in this one, we are putting, in simple terms, right? I try to make everything simple terms. It can either slide or it can tip over. The issue with this was it was going to tip over. So the solution for this was to put these rock anchors in, drill through the dam, and install post-tension anchors to physically tie the dam to the rock below. Each one of these, and they're using these bars that are shown in that bottom left corner. Each one of those bars we stress when we're testing it to about 200,000 pounds. These are not light loads that we're talking about. Next slide. That's what one looks like in practice. That's just the top. That's where they're drilling the hole. This is in the spillway through the anchor pier. So we'll cut the stone out so that you won't see that, but the anchor is there holding that pier in. Next slide. This kind of shows you the top picture is the test that you do when you stress it. You take readings of all that to make sure that you're holding the load, that things are behaving the way that you want them to. The jack that they use to stress these things to 200,000 pounds. And you can see it's just a nut that they're tightening there that then they cover with a cap and everything. And each one of these anchors is protected by a layer of grout, which provides protection on the steel, and then a plastic sheath that also provides protection called a double corrosion protected anchor, typical for dam design. So next slide, Jeff. The next one, leakage improvements. Okay. This was.
So all that other stuff was all in scope work?
All in scope.
Okay, so everything you're showing is everything's in scope so far?
In scope, and when I get to the end, you'll see in scope.
And then you'll show us where we might not be.
Some
Okay.
other stuff, yeah. So leakage improvements, this is what everybody, who knows the dam, talks about, the leakage that was through the dam. So the solution to that was core through the dam and then grout. So next slide. This is the work that they were doing. So physically coring through the dam, a couple pictures of that, and you can just see the grout that they're injecting in there. Next slide. This shows you the condition of that dam, and pictures worth 1,000 words. A prop, my show and tell item that you can pass around. That is what the inside of the dam, that is concrete, that is supposed to be solid. And you can see the pictures kind of show what you see when you drill through there, and that is not watertight. So there were some challenges there. Next slide. Again, it just kind of shows you the cores that come out and how no, I'm that's my prop to teach new engineers. Shows you kind of what came out and how disjointed all that was. This is kind of shows you what the dam was when we started. Next slide. A little bit, this is the grouting work. So you see all these are bags of cement that we're injecting into the ground. That's the grout pump. And these are what's called packers. That's how they test the water tightness. You basically were making sure that when we're done, we have the water tightness that we need. So next slide. You can see there's June as we were fighting this, and success. This is from last week. We no longer have a lot of water coming through the dam. So big success there. That's the most notable piece. A lot of this other stuff, when we're done, we won't notice, we won't see, but I think everyone will see that. Next slide. Operational improvements. This deals with the work on the exterior of the gatehouse to address the sluice gates on the exterior of the gatehouse with some grading and walkway and operators to operate new valves. Next slide.
Hey, just for you go on,
Sure.
I'm still in the core.
Yep.
I'm sorry, I'm following you, but I'm still thinking about that core.
Yep.
You wouldn't expect to have seen that like that?
We expected some, however, not that the extreme
What's the
amount.
root cause? What's the root cause for that?
My belief
Yeah.
is back in the 1890s when they built this,
Yeah.
Cement quality was variable, right? It was sort of a new product
Yeah.
here. And I think the cement that they used on this site is just not very good.
Okay, so at least you have an idea of why there was the failure over a period of time.
Right.
From what you were expecting to see.
And I'll go back because there's a general public in terms of what is cement, what is concrete?
Yeah.
Concrete is cement, sand, and stone. So that is not cement, that is concrete. I took, my master's degree was actually in concrete, so my
Well, it had to be
advisor
interesting.
was very keen on that and drilled it into my head, and I've drilled it into all my kids' heads. So cement is like the flour in a fruitcake. A fruitcake is your concrete, okay? So yes, I think the cement they used back then was poor quality, and after 100 years, not so good. And you'll see that, I think, as we get on a little bit further. But certainly, absolutely, I'm here to answer questions. So operational improvements, picture on the left is the gate that was rehabilitated in the 1980s before the dam came under the regulating district's purview. You can see that is a timber gate. My guess is that gate was put in and was never able to be used because these gates are under, how deep is? 36 feet of waterhead pushing that gate. The only way you can operate that gate if you have an empty chamber is there's a little 6-inch valve at the bottom that's supposed to fill the chamber so the water pressure is equalized. I don't think there's even an operator on that valve from the top. So if you close those gates, you'd never be able to get them open without doing some other work. So I don't think those were ever used. Being replaced with modern cast iron gates, these can be operated under full head. You can see bronze, low friction sealing surfaces, that type of thing. These are what is used today, and that's the idea here. Next slide. So these are on site. Those are not installed yet, and see why. The other one is the main logway bulkhead gate. The dam has always had this logway, but sometime prior to the 1980s, they put stop logs in, not an operational feature, to give more flexibility, number one, to do the project, and then going forward in the future to get more flow capacity if needed, we put a simple operable gate in. So next slide. This is talking, I'm going to go a little bit over the amount of fighting that was involved in getting this gate to be in. So the top left, you can see, the schedule of when all this work was being done was kind of pushed because of the way things just happen on site. This was supposed to be done when the water level was down. They were fighting with the water level was high, trying to do the work. So you can see the poor quality cement of the structure. The water is just coming through the stone into the place where they're trying to work. So I don't know if the date is here, April 18th. That's when they trying to seal it up here. April 30th, they're having some success. They are driving wedges and trying to grout in there, but you can see it's still pouring in. So they dealt with that type of fighting, valiant effort. Next slide, John. And then we also have, so to get around that, you eventually put in a cofferdam, so a structure in front of that area so that you could dewater in front of that. So here they are putting that in. We had to get rid of the debris that was in front of the gate in order to do that work. So this kind of shows you the effort that they had in there. Divers doing the work as well. Next slide. But ultimately, we do have success. We do have the gate in place. It's behind the cofferdam right now while they're finishing up some other work. But we have that gate for use as soon as we get rid of the cofferdam and the water level comes back up. So next slide. Spillway bridge replacement. You saw my pictures. I'm going to cut to the chase. You can see the next slide. You can imagine if they're just putting the anchors in the spillway, next slide, they certainly don't have that bridge in place yet because they're working there. So all the materials on site, they've started, so it comes in pieces. They've started putting the erector set together. This is what it looks like last week. or last, yeah, it was last week is what I saw out there. Slide. Debris boom, the other one is to upgrade the kind of timber debris boom that's tied to some trees on site with a more modern, robust design. So next slide kind of shows you what it would look like. Next slide. And this is what we have today. We have the material on site. Again, high visibility. This will be a much safer, better design, but it is not installed. Next slide. The other things that we have going on, the lake access trail and portage or portage, depending on what part of New York State or Canada you live in. That work has not been done, but this, like I said, I covered all the same things. But the EFC and the DEC were out on site last week and got a tour with Rob and John. And this kind of just goes over what that looked like. So that's what's anticipated. Slide. So challenges, right? Construction challenges. Next slide. So I broke this up into two categories, what I will call the normal things that are overruns that you might expect. Because although we do our due diligence in the design and the investigative phase, you can't look at everything. There's a balance between how much invasive or investigative effort you spend up front so that we could cover everything, but the fee to do that investigative work would be a lot higher than what we had spent. But you might pay a little bit in construction, right? We can't get everything exactly right in the design phase.
So do you use percentages when you're doing those types of design? Like plus or minus 20%, plus or minus 40%?
We start there, but when you put your plan set out, you have to give the contractor, this is my quantity.
Yeah, I know you got a contingency built in. I know that,
Yeah.
but I'm talking about when you're given an estimate. So you say you got an estimate, and let's say it's $100,000, and you got a contingency. You're going to build in 10% contingency at least, if not more, depending upon your business. So let's say it's 100,000. You got 90,000 your cost. So you come to me and you say, okay, I've got a project here for 100,000, and it's plus or minus 20% because of the amount of engineering we did.
Right.
So I can say it'll never go down. So I can say, okay, we're talking 120,000.
Right.
Do you do it that way?
That is what you do, and in the beginning of the design, you have a larger contingency. At the
Yes.
end of design, you whittle that down to
Yeah.
where we're giving a number.
It should be around 10% or something.
And I don't know exactly the number. It does go down. Yes.
I'm just trying to figure out how we
5%,
do this, how we get to
And
where we get
that's
to.
quantity, and then you throw the other thing in, which is the whole bidding climate and everything.
Yeah.
We're engineers, we're not contractors. We have a good idea of what things might cost, but
Yeah.
the contractors, when they really look at it and dig into it, our assumed price per quantity might be off. So there's two numbers that can vary based on what our impression is. So, and that contingency is supposed to handle kind of both of those.
Yes.
And it's not exact. But yes, you're right.
And ultimately, in the case specifically here,
right,
we had one bidder, and we're subject to that bidder's prices, or we don't get the project done.
No, but I understand, but still,
So
even
regardless
though
of what the probable cost estimate was, ultimately, it's the contractor's price, regardless of what contingency you added in, what percentage that contingency was. None of that matters. If you had multiple bidders, then we could obviously see a trend there.
I don't want to beat this too much, but
Yeah.
but the contingency, when you're doing that contingency and going in, whether there's one bidder or three bidders, you're entering into an agreement for this to be done for that amount. Now, if there's something that you come against that's changed, the concrete, you bore it down, you saw that. Okay, this is out of scope now. This is different. Now, okay, there's a process to go through now. This is out of scope. You come forward and say, we hadn't anticipated this. Everything we had, this is out of our scope now. Then there's an agreement to how much additional money has to come out because of that. So then you get back to an individual occurrence that's driving the cost versus you get to the end and you got all these different things that came out of that were changes that you hadn't anticipated or whatever.
Right.
As you go through, you're doing them individually as you go so you can keep track of the amount of money it's costing you. I'm just curious, what's your process on that? Do you guys do a change of scope and then is there a amount of money given?
So there'll be a RFI that comes in from the contractor.
Request for information.
And based on an area where they're suggesting they need to do things differently, there might be an increase in quantity. That'll come in first to Bergman. They'll consult with Rob Fulton. We'll decide whether or not it's reasonable. In some cases, we'll go back and say, no, you can't do that. In some cases, after going through that process, we will approve because of the nature of change in scope, or as has been mostly the case on the things that Greg is going to talk about, a change in quantity on certain issues where there are more voids that need to be filled through grouting, requires more grouting material. So that, in a nutshell, I think, am I describing the process pretty much right?
Yeah, you got down to that. But yeah, it's driven by the fact that we don't have an absolute perfect estimate of quantities. We didn't know exactly 3 feet in how many voids we find like this. So when we get to the pumping of grout, in that one slide that showed the vertical shaft inside, Collier's best guess, based on its observation of the outside, maybe a coring or two on 150 feet of length of the spillway, gives us an indication of the void space that's there. We make an estimate in the contract, but the contractor has to give us a unit price. What drives the price up will be the fact that there are so many unknowns in terms of the voids that we pay more because of the quantity, not because of the price change. Price stays fixed on that. There are some lump sum items.
But what you're talking about, though, again, from what I'm used to, then you go and say, okay, I have a proposal here for you. Because again, most of it's either going to be cost or justified, or you got to stay within inside of a budget. I mean, that's why we're asking this question.
Yep.
So it's say, okay, I've got an estimate for you. The estimate's coming in at X amount. Now, we could do additional engineering, but this is what the additional engineering is going to cost you to get there, and we still are going to not know everything. So this is coming in at a set figure, and we recommend that you do a 40%, based on the estimate that's coming in, of 40%, that this could go over by 40% of what the current amount is, due to the unknowns and stuff that are within inside of the project. 40%, 20%, 10%. A lot of it, as you do the additional engineering, the idea is to get it down to 10% if you can, because your contingency will normally handle that. But when you haven't been able to do all the engineering and stuff you increase your amount of contingency. So nothing comes back as a surprise. We're into these things, we've asked a bunch of questions, how close are we on this, and stuff are going through there. And, the answers that are coming back, okay, we've done this engineering, we paid a bunch of money. We paid a bunch of money for engineering to go through, and again, I don't know dams, so I'm guessing dams have got to have a lot of contingencies, I think, built into them, because I don't think you know until you get into them what's going on, probably. But especially if you can't determine if the cement's that good from 100 years ago.
Yeah.
Well, it was concrete or cement. I want to make sure I got it right.
Well, either one for this case. It's either one. That works.
So I don't want to get on the wrong side. But going again, so then when you come out of the scope, so let's say we X amount of money. This is more for other projects and stuff. That's why I'm hitting on it. We're coming out X of money. We say, okay, it's $10 million, but it's plus or minus 20%. So the reality is that could go to $12 million of going through. You have contingency built into it anyway. So let's say you got 10% contingency, so you got $9 million. So if it goes past that 9 million, you guys are going to look at it up to 10 and say, okay, do it or not do it. Once it goes past 10, based on change orders and stuff that you have that are going through, once it goes past 10, then I think that's where we have to get involved and stuff and saying, hey, you know what? Due to the change orders, due to the different things that we've gotten, we've gone past the amount money. Now we're looking at X amount more coming at us from down point. And all I'm asking for is if instead of thinking we've got a number that's close, we're really quite far off on some of these projects going on. And so let's put in a contingency so we know what the heck we're looking at from a money standpoint as we're going through.
So in this project, we did have a
We did
contingency
budget
on it.
contingency.
I know.
And the only bid that came in close to 40% above
Yeah.
what our probable cost was.
Yeah.
And then we budgeted.
So you're already exceeding, at the time you accept that contract, you've already exceeded the contingency.
I think Tim needs to make an important point here.
That we
on the
budgeted the contingency, not based on prior iterations of preliminary design, final design. We budgeted the contingency in the current budget cycle based on the contractor's accepted and approved cost for the project of $10.8 million. So we did 10% on top of that and included that in the budget that the board adopted back in June.
And again, based on the engineering, it sounds like we probably should have gone higher. And that's where the engineering firm and also the contractors got to help us with inside of those numbers, because we're not going to be experts on doing that. But to me, the whole idea should be there shouldn't be any surprises. The change agents ought to be in order, that when there's a change in the scope of contract, then a change form comes through that's accepted. The additional money is either part of the contingency or not. If it's not, then it ought to be coming back and saying, okay, this is additional money that we're going to need. And this is why we missed
I
it.
think there might be a bit of a problem in there, in that I'm not sure, well, in 25 years, I've never seen the board authorize a project contractor cost plus an unknown contingency value.
But what
I'm not
Mr. Reagan
sure
might be
that can be
mentioning,
done.
what he might be referring to is we will come back to the board if we need to increase the authorized amount for the contract, which is currently 10.8. The same process we're going through on additional work, we're also going through that process with the contractor on what aren't you going to do? And in some cases where the contractor said, well, we're not going to do this work, and that's going to be $200,000 in savings. Mr. Fultan and Greg and his team have identified, no, actually, there should be more savings than that based on the scope of work that now you don't need to do. So the hope, Mr. Reagan, is we come back to a net zero on the bid price. But if it's not net zero, if it's plus 200,000 or 300,000 or wherever it comes in after that, even if it's within the contingency, we will come back. Well, I should say, if we have to amend the board authorized amount for the project, we will come back to the board likely in January.
Yeah, we can follow up on it, just to think about it. Hawkinsville is a great example. The board authorized the 1.7. Had it authorized 1.7 plus 30%, John and I would have lost a huge leverage over the contractor, which in the end of that project, we saved $200,000-300,000 because we stood our ground and we negotiated with them and they conceded. And if we had a resolution and it was public knowledge that the board approved 1.7 plus another 30%, I'm pretty sure that contractor would not have given up as easily as he did.
But I would go back. Why would you ever tell the contractor contingency?
It was public.
Then I wouldn't, there's
It's
got to
public
be.
knowledge, though. It's public record.
Okay, then you know what? I'll just shut up.
It's tough. It's a struggle.
No. This stuff, again, I've done this for years, you guys. I've dealt with this type of stuff for years and years and years of going over budget and not over budget. I've sat and been lectured. I've been downgraded because I've not come in on budgets and stuff like that. If we ever went in front of the board, a normal board of going forward with an overrun like this, you would be walking out of there with your head between your legs, because I've done it a number of times going through there. And so all I'm saying is we go in, we ask the question, how good, especially after the last one, we said, how good are we on this one? We feel we've got a good contract. We only had one person bid on it. There's no pressure to come in with a low cost when you're only bidder. You're gonna come in through there.
You don't know you're the only bidder at the time you bid is one difference. Just
I-
one of the
I-
many
I-
differences, I think, between public and private experience
and
and the
that's the
requirements that
No,
we.
it's
have
not,
to-
it's not. There's a lot of times you only have one bidder. Because you live in a rural area and there's one bidder for coming in on that thing. And that's what you do with you guys. These things aren't different than other things of going through. Either we're not doing enough engineering to determine our costs, or we've got to set aside and say we have too much unknowns that we have to inflate what our prices of going on with the original amount. I've never heard anybody give out what their contingency was, other than internally.
Sure, well, in private sector, that's the case, and you could solicit those bids from contractor and private sector. We can't solicit bids, we can't pick a particular contractor, we have to publish it and wait to see who comes to us. And that is the biggest difference between private sector, and having worked like Greg, as I did for my first 6 years in the hydro and dams, that's the, a big difference in when you have a client that is a government agency as compared to a private developer. You're far more restricted and limited, and you run into these difficulties all the time. It's just the system, unfortunately, sometimes.
Well, it would drive me crazy.
Drives
us crazy too.
Some of us who've been in the private sector first, and then you come, it's a learning curve.
Yes. Okay, so, what I would put in here are some things that, and these are quantity changes. The repointing, and we're paying, so I'll give you an example of doing when we do our estimate of quantities. Repointing is based on linear feet. We did not measure every linear foot of repointing, right? And it's above water and below water. So those quantities have been off. And then the core wall extension, that core wall was longer than what we could tell in the drawings. And at the end, it fattened out. So we were off on the quantity of that. So these are what I would say are kind of like the normal, these are quantities that changed because we just weren't that accurate in the estimating process, and we were off. We did not have sufficient contingency for those items. We should have potentially adjusted the quantity up or something. So next, I would put into what I call just completely unforeseen conditions. These are things that we did not anticipate coming up during the construction project. And there's two items here: gatehouse condition, which I'll show you the next slide. Loose and missing stones. This has to do with actually, and it's in that area. These are the divers. They're taking formwork off of the. This is the where the water comes out of the low level outlet. Some of those stones were actually gone that you couldn't see underwater. And when they were doing the repointing, they said, well, by the way, there's no stones here. So we had to put concrete back. So that, and then the next slide. So the divers are out working on pulling the formwork off. So future needs, and I'll get into the gatehouse on this one. So next. Oh, so that gatehouse, so I say future needs gatehouse work, and I'll get into that, I'll show that, is an increase that I would say is needed. And we also have some decreases, so we can be off both ways, okay? Next slide. This is the good news. This is, the blue line is where we anticipated the rock surface was going to be when we did this wall work. The red line is what has been measured in the field. And because we were building, we didn't want to excavate in front of this old masonry wall because we had no design information on that. If I run numbers on that, I could probably show that it wasn't, number one, I didn't have any information to run numbers on, but number two, I would probably show that was an issue if I dug down. So we put in a system which is pretty complicated called secant piles, where you're basically drilling holes in the ground you drill opposite holes and then you drill in between, and all these holes get filled with concrete. So you have a continuous concrete barrier to keep the water from coming out. Because the rock is so much higher, this is where we were going to build our concrete wall conventionally. Because that rock is so much higher, we don't need that wall. So that's a success. That's a good price.
Change the plan.
So we're dealing with
Because
contractor on that actually
they have to,
to the
they're
yard.
going to be able to use the
Can do.
unit that has the heater in it, but they'll have to do some cutting of the ceiling or the floor of the attic.
I've texted Megan and asked her to mute other
Is
participants.
already there, but
Okay. So then the next slide. This is the gatehouse. So what you're looking at, you can see on this side, the main dam is to the left. This is a section looking kind of like you're standing in the middle of the dam looking through the dam. This is a section you're standing in front of the dam looking at the dam. So this masonry kind of sticks out of the dam on the upstream side, and it's a chamber that we were not able to investigate during design, because the only way into this, number one, you have to shut this sluice gate. The diver swam in the gate after they pulled the trash racks off. That dive video, they found, you can see this shows there's supposed to be a concrete floor in here. That concrete floor is gone. Most of the mortar in the wall is gone. Again, I think the cement used is not of high quality. You have the water that rushes through this. It has taken all of the glue that's holding that together is missing. So next slide. We went through, and part of the work was to put these new sluice gates on this structure so that we could dewater that and have access to the main gates, which Rob uses to control water, which I think are original to the dam and have never been anything done to them. So that is a key function that needs to be maintained and looked at. So we can't, our original design was just to repoint that masonry, because if it was good, our numbers showed that that would be okay. After we saw that it was in the condition it was, we no longer were comfortable with that solution. So we had to develop a different solution, which we went through the design for. These are our kind of concept sketches. I'll show you the engineering drawings are a little harder to see, but essentially we designed a solution where you build a concrete wall around the gatehouse up to a certain level to essentially just put a new structure on the outside of that would be the structure that is holds everything back. We'd be able to use all the materials that we've already purchased and are on site. So the sluice gates would, instead of being on the masonry, they would be on the exterior of the concrete. So this solution was what we proposed and what we ended up designing. So the next slide shows the picture of kind of a section of what that would look like. Essentially a wall here right in front. And kind of that's what the front elevation would look like. And then I didn't have the holes in here, but the sluice gates would be right there. So that's the design of that. And like I said, what two engineer concept sketches can do, it takes, 8 engineering drawings, and I won't bother, and they're more complicated and confusing. So in all that, when I say future needs, that kind of goes through the construction aspect. This kind of goes through the design and the construction inspection aspect of the job. So again, there's some increases and some decreases. We're trying to do what we can. So the gatehouse itself, that design of the new structure was not anticipated in our scope. Submittals, RFIs, all that work has been, because of the complexities and things that were found, that has been more effort. And then just the construction inspection time, just due to the fact that the contractor his schedule has extended past the anticipated stop date, there needs to be more time just to do that inspection. Potential or decreases that we're talking about is, we had in our scope to do CAD updates of the as-built drawings. So update our files based on what the contractor has done. I talked to Rob and said, look, if you don't need those CAD files, we don't have to do that. You can just take the contractor's markups. And he's said, yes, I think that's a good idea. We can save some money by doing that, and we don't need to do that work. So that's a savings. And then like John already alluded to, is for the construction inspection. We have 2 inspectors out there because there's a lot of work going on, and they would share the work. Essentially what is going to occur starting next week is we will be down to 1 inspector on site from Bergman, supplemented by a regulating district staff member.
Just one question on your drawings, you guys. Are you sure you don't want to have updated drawings in case they're needed at some point in time?
Well, you'll have the drawings, you just won't have, what we were gonna do, you'll have the contractor's markups, which will show, it'll be what we call as-built drawings. It'll
Okay,
say,
so
instead of
you
doing
will
this-
have
Yes.
drawings.
He will have drawings.
Annotated,
That's
hand annotated.
hand annotated instead of,
And if we need to, like we did with Hawkinsville, we can always take those CAD drawings.
No, I wanted to make sure you had the
We
history.
could use our staff to finalize
yes,
if we needed them
yes.
finished in CAD format rather than hand.
Yeah, I got it. I understand what you got now.
Yep, just a cheaper way of doing it.
Yep.
You get the information, so. And that is it. Any more questions?
Any other questions?
And I think one other thing that should be maybe stressed too is that nothing about any of the contractors' additional work or even engineering for example, on the gatehouse, that none of that came about as a result of anything other than work that needs to be done at the dam. That is, if we had spent even more time investigating with a lot of underwater, a lot more subsurface investigation, and maybe we would have identified some of these issues that we're running into, but at the end, that work still needed to be done, whether we identified it 2 years ago or we identify it today.
Right.
And I might even argue, under the gun, the engineering firm's going to work really fast to expedite that work because it doesn't want to delay the construction. So we turned around those 8 drawings for the gatehouse, for example, fairly rapidly.
Yes.
I have as much confidence in that set as I did the other set, but these were done very efficiently, I would say. And like the repointing, even though we didn't identify the exact volume of voids inside the dam, the fact that the contract with the contractor is a unit price, those voids existed whether we identified them or not, and the unit rate we agreed to covers us, and the cost that it associated with filling all those voids didn't change once we accepted that bid price, whether we identified them a year ago
Right.
or we didn't identify them, because those voids still needed to be filled and still need to be filled at the unit rate that the contractor proposed. So
You would have had less contingency, but you would have
you
paid
would have-
me more to get
you would
less
have-
contingency.
and you would have- right?
But you would have ended up
Exactly.
paying about the
And-
same price in
And
construction.
there's certainly no guarantee that all of the additional engineering to identify some of the additional voids would have gotten us to the point where what we put in as the estimated quantity in the bid sheet actually represented 100% of what was needed. So you may have spent a lot more on engineering to get to maybe within 75 or 80%. And then you're still paying the extra for the volume of material that you're putting in there that you just, even if there was a contingency that you just didn't identify. And if your contingency is based on that 75 or 80%, you're still then not covered by contingency for what the actual volume is that's necessary to complete the work. That's why the unit price contracts come in really handy especially with the dams, as compared to a lump sum price. Because in the end, you're paying for a volume of material that was necessary, absolutely necessary to complete the work.
I think one of the things I take away from Mr. Reagan's comments is doing all the reasonable engineering on the front end to reduce the surprises, hopefully eliminate the surprises, and shrink that contingency down to a point where you can live within it, because you're not surprised when you get into construction to the greatest extent possible. I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but that's one of the things I'm.
The only observation I had, or question, I guess, is if that made perfect sense, is if we did more in the beginning, does it then give you an opportunity for more bidders because you reduce the unknowns as part of that later process? Because I know sometimes that's a factor.
I don't know if the bidders really have a sense of
a daunting task.
Well, or a sense of whether or not we believe that there's a potential for the volumes to be above or below what is listed in the bid sheet.
Okay.
We don't indicate a margin of error associated with those. In fact, just the opposite in our contract. Regardless of how much we deviate, how much the contractor will have to deviate in the volume placed, the unit rate is still going to be the same. That's one of the conditions of the contract, and there are some contractors that don't like that. But in terms of, especially if it's a 50% overrun, right? They may argue, but we're pretty strong in our contract, and it's made known. But I don't know if the because we don't express a deviation or a margin of error in the estimate in the quantities, whether that would because we don't would draw any more attention.
Pretty extraordinary period though we're in over the last 5, 6, 7 years, right? And I think you're seeing this with other projects. So much federal money out there, so much state money, so much work on the street that there's really a bandwidth and capacity issue in the contracting world, and so what we saw, just 2 bids on Hawkinsville, just a single bid here, is something that other agencies and other private sector projects are also seeing, which is a relatively low number of unique bidders per project.
Right. But to answer your question, as Rob said, the only thing that would have changed if we had known the quantities better is numbers on that single drawing, and the contractor is going to have no idea, are those that much more accurate or not? They really won't. The only thing I would say is you might anticipate if we had spent a ton of money on investigation of the gatehouse and things like that, you wouldn't have that big unknown, but it's always a cost benefit thing, and engineering work, if you think about a graph, a lot of benefit at the beginning, and then as it goes out, you get a lot of money spent for not much additional effort, and you want to try to hit that sweet spot, which I think, that's Rob's directive, and I think he did a pretty good job. Although,
any other comments or anything? Boy, thank you very much.
Thank you.
This is great. Thanks for that. Just says report, so we don't have to take any, there's no action here, right?
No action.
Okay, the next is committee reports. I think you already had the audit committee.
We have but if there are any other questions that anyone has, John has departed, but I'll do my best to answer them if something's come up between now and an hour and a half ago.
Okay, we don't have a general counsel report, or did he?
We do not.
Okay.
He submitted it as part of the packet, but
Okay.
he's not here to take any questions.
And the director of administrative.
Same with
Services,
Mr.
same,
Zick.
okay. Chief engineer, Mr. Fulton.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My report, actually, I believe, I don't know, if I have maybe an earlier version of the agenda, but I believe it's on page 73. If I'm not mistaken. I keep it fairly short, but still hit the high points, I guess. Through the 22nd of October, Hudson River area inflow to Great Sacandaga and Indian Lake was 15% and 24% of historic average. So, as everybody would suspect, it was fairly dry. And Black River was not much different, with still water at about 32% of historic average inflow. The graphs tell the story. We are slightly below target. I say slightly because certainly with the year's graph, you can see we were well above the target, but about a foot and a half below the target elevation of Great Sacandaga Lake, and about 2 to 3/10 of a foot below Indian Lake. And both of those, though, are still continuing despite the drier weather tracking fairly consistently with the drawdown rate represented by that target elevation, although just below it. Stillwater Reservoir, we're right on target, and Old Forge and Six Lakes slightly above, but rapidly with the drier weather. Even despite some of the rain that Mr. Bird experienced over the weekend or yesterday, which made very little impact in the inflow to Six Lakes Old Forge. We're tracking pretty closely to the targets, just above, actually, though, at Six Lake and Old Forge. I would like to note, I think, and maybe we mentioned it previously, but in the 24 years since the offer of settlement has been in place, if this weather trend continues, Great Sacandaga Lake will be at its lowest elevation on December 1st that it has seen in 24 years. Only slightly below historic average, but below the target elevation also, which is kind of unusual, especially with the offer of settlement. Let's see, the report also includes summary, although you just got a much better summary on than the construction observation report that Collier's provided. That's at the end of my report. With regard to Conklinville Dam, the project is about 30% of final design phase, working toward the 100% by the end of the first quarter in 2025. Construction is anticipated to begin at the end of the third quarter of 2025 and will include work on the spillway and the outlet structure, a lot of concrete rehabilitation, anchoring of the spillway, and also a replacement of the dowel valves with new outlet gates. And I'm sure the one question that is in the back of everyone's mind that asks how the project is going, there is no change or deviation from the offer of settlement reservoir operation or elevation proposed to complete the work at this time. So, and we don't anticipate any either. Contractor like Indian Lake and like Hawkinsville will have to work around our operations and our normal drawdown and refilling process and our need to augment the Hudson River. So if there are any questions, I'd be happy to take those.
Any questions?
Thank
you very much. Chief Fiscal Officer, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The CFO report begins on page 112 of your packet. Bank and investment balances through the first 4 months of the fiscal year are down significantly from the same period last year. This arises mostly from the regulating district's continued pay-as-you-go financing of the Indian Lake Dam Rehabilitation Project and year-over-year reduction in the assessment in the Hudson River area. I mentioned in my summary, but I'm now happy to report that we have received the first reimbursement from New York State Environmental Facilities Corporation in the amount of roughly $2.5 million. We've also submitted the second reimbursement request, which I believe that they are working on as we speak, in the amount of roughly $1.4 million. So these and future reimbursements for the cost of construction in Indian Lake will strengthen our liquidity in the Hudson River area. We've obviously covered an awful lot of financial topics this morning, so I'll be happy to pause and offer to answer any additional questions anyone has.
Any questions, comments? Thank you.
Before you move on, Mr. Chair, if I may, I'd like to call your attention to the signed affidavit. You can find on page 135 of your packet the list of necessary and reasonable expenses incurred by board members relating to their participation in a recent board meeting. Article 3, Section 2 of the Regulating Districts bylaws require the board to approve payment before any reimbursement can be made. And before I ask for a motion to approve these expense reimbursements, I'm happy to offer to answer any questions you or any other board members may have.
We have a motion to accept the expenses.
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you.
Any other questions for fiscal? Next, we go to board member questions and comments. Is there any update on the dam for not paying us?
On Brookfield, no update beyond the fact that, as Mr. Leslie reported, the assistant AG that he's been working with is preparing the summons and complaint. I had asked Mr. Leslie recently if he thought that that would be something that Brookfield is served with by the end of this calendar year. He was non-committal, but I think reading the tea leaves, we would certainly hope that. Also, just note, as I've mentioned to a couple of members individually, as you drive around the reservoir, you'll see that the Sakadaga Protection Committee has taken up our cause a little bit. They've also engaged in some letter writing campaigns to their state legislators on our behalf, just supporting our position and supporting the Attorney General's taking Brookfield to court to try and get the company to pay its fair share. You know, we talk about the taxpayers downstream paying their fair share, the permittees certainly around the reservoir paying their fair share. We just want everybody to share in the cost, especially the people that are generating a lot of money. So that's the only update I have on that issue.
Thank you,
Mr. Chair.
Need a resolution for our next board meeting on 114 at Sakadaga Field Office.
Make that motion. Is that joke?
Second? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any
Aye.
motion for adjournment?
I will.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Right on
Thank you.
time.
Aye.
Hanging in. Over the line.
Thank you, Megan.
Water, huh?
Yeah.